Evening, everybody, and welcome to episode six of Deep Dive December with Impact Marathons. My name's Nick Kershaw. I'm the founder and CEO of the Impact Marathon series, and it's been an immense pleasure. Really has been an immense pleasure to share so many of the characters who make Impact Marathon what it is and give you an insight into how we create Impact Marathons. Now, something we've been working on a lot through this pause in operations has been our Green World program. We're fully aware that the impact we make in communities needs to be larger than the impact we make in the environment, and we need to make sure that Impact Marathons going forward is incredibly sustainable and is brilliant at raising awareness for all the different ways that we can create the climate that we need to see in the world today. Central to that has been our relationship with Stamford Trees, and it's been a privilege of mine to work with a man called Michael Radomir, who is a leading thought leader in the world of climate change policy, but also content and storytelling. Stamford Trees has been a hugely powerful content house in terms of telling these stories, and you will have seen them from such viral videos as Prince EA with over 200 million views, which is Dear Future Generations, an amazing spoken word video that you must watch and give 3 minutes of your time to because it's brilliant. Aside from that, he's also involved in a lot of the conversations around the actual policies that need to be taking place. He's a Brit who lives in Washington. He's quite an incredible character, and he's simplified what is an incredibly complex discussion and made it into what was a very empowering and optimistic viewpoint on the future of our planet, which I think is slightly different to what we see most of the time in the media. So here it is, Michael Radomir from Stamford Trees. Michael Radomir here today, joining us from... Are you still in Washington at the moment? Is that where you're based?
Yes, been here in 2 years, stuck here for the moment. It's snowy, but no riots, even though Donald Trump hasn't left the White House, and here in Washington.
Well, an interesting time to be living there through this period. What's the last couple of months been like?
Well, there have been flashpoints in and around the White House. You know, it's been a sort of charged atmosphere here in America, really, since Donald Trump became president. But, you know, we had the Black Lives Matter movement really come through with George Floyd's death, you know, about a year ago. And there's been regular protests, and obviously the contested election, or the falsely contested election, and Donald Trump's sorts of very strange antics have not helped, and there have been some clashes and even some stabbings between anti-fascist protesters and kind of fascist protesters. So that's been a little disturbing, but it's been very contained. It's localized around the sort of government buildings downtown, and overall it's been pretty good. It's not, you know, the media, I think, especially the visual news, you see the worst of it. But living here, the mayor's done a great job, and the city's in good shape.
And as a British person living there, how much do you engage in that conversation, the political conversations? Is it something that you feel comfortable getting involved in those conversations? Do you feel a bit more?
I like to keep track of it. As you say, you know, I'm British. I may become an American citizen one day. It's important to the work I do in the environment to keep on top of politics, because it has especially international forest protection, which we work on. You know, the Republicans and the Democrats are slightly different in how they approach that, but and I'm personally very interested in American politics, and I'm passionate about America, so I do get involved. But you do have to be sensitive, and even though I've been coming to America for many years and I've done business here and I've got family here, you have to learn about the country, and it's easy to judge, you know, if you are brought up here in America, obviously. So I am careful what to say, and I'm still learning, but I do get involved in the conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that it segues nicely into starting off the conversation around your work, and obviously we've worked together because of the relationship between Impact Marathon and Stamford Trees. But Stamford Trees isn't the only thing that you do personally either in terms of climate politics. But yeah, if you could just give a quick overview of the work of Stamford Trees, and a bit about how you ended up ended up in that line of work and in that field?
So Stamford Trees is the public-facing program of Code Red. Code Red is a US nonprofit set up by some of the early pioneers of Red Plus. And I'm just going to step back a second, explain what Red Plus is, because that is what at Code Red and Stamford Trees we exclusively are focused on. It's this one environmental policy called Red Plus, which stands for Reduced Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. And it's a UN framework that was internationally negotiated over many, many years and formally adopted as in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the UN body where the Paris Agreement sits, to protect forests. And it really was something that was added in this transition from the old international framework on climate change called the Kyoto Protocol to the new framework, which eventually was the Paris Agreement. And what Red Plus recognizes is that deforestation is a key part of the climate challenge, and that if we are going to solve climate change, we have to solve deforestation, because deforestation accounts for 12% of all global emissions at the moment. That's more than all cars and trucks globally, to put it in perspective. And why it hasn't been, well, not that it wasn't so much recognized previously, although it is more and more important, is that it's been very hard to regulate, because forests are not like power stations. They're not like the transport sector and cars where you can just implement standards and it's technical. We're dealing with huge landscapes. Whole countries is how this framework works. For going from the smallest of project scale Red Plus, which will be 25,000 acres or 10,000 hectares, that's the really smaller scale, going up to the whole nation scale for the largest of countries like Brazil. So you're dealing with enormous landscapes, as I say, full country scale at some point, millions, if not hundreds of millions of people across the landscape. And you've got to try and fit everyone in. And there's a huge amount of monitoring and all sorts of complicated rules that were over time thought through. And what it boils down to is understanding how many emissions were happening from deforestation and rewarding those communities and those countries for reducing it. Because deforestation, unfortunately, is an issue of economics, and it mainly happens in developing world and the tropics and tropical countries. 95% of net deforestation in the developing tropical forest countries. And it's poor people, developing countries who are just looking to make a living. So they'll cut down the forest or they'll burn the forest for agriculture, sometimes for mining at the small scale or the large scale, or for local sustenance, firewood, goat grazing, whatever it may be. But they need to be able to make a living by protecting the forest. So the world got together through the UN and developed this framework whereby we strictly can measure how many tons of carbon dioxide are being reduced by reducing that deforestation, and we reward those communities and those countries based on how many tons of carbon dioxide are reduced. So at Code Red and Stamford Trees, we do two things. At Stamford Trees, we explain the Red Plus framework under an e-commerce platform where we explain how it works. Perhaps that's the wrong thing to say. Let me rephrase that. At Stamford Trees, we engage the public about this issue by explaining the background, giving bite-sized information, and allowing the public to support this process for as little as $6 for a half-ton certificate. And they can choose a project, they can learn how different projects work, they can use their credit card and PayPal, Facebook, all sorts of easy, public-friendly things to engage in this rather high-level process, which normally involves having a special carbon trading account, having a special type of contract known as emissions reduction purchase agreement. So we are liberalizing this to the world, to the general public, so they can help be part of this solution. As a website, we try and make it cool, and social media and all sorts of content that really helps people understand and engage with the platform. And the other thing we do at Code Red is more the technical side under special policy reports, market reviews, certain conversations with businesses. So we're doing the policy work at Code Red, and we're engaging with the public through Stamford Trees.
And then the projects themselves, do they fall under the work of Code Red, or are they independent projects that Code Red identifies as ones that fit within their policy goals?
They are all independent. They are members with us. So each project decides to join Code Red and be part of the Stamford Trees platform, and we do those two things for them. We assist them with policy. So as part of a group, they've got a stronger voice when we're having policy discussions with policymakers, but they also come together to make these small engagements with the public, each and individually, but with a larger picture there that the public can see, a sort of global effort. And they are individual projects. They do have to meet certain criteria from our side to become a member. They have to be verified under a standard for Red Plus that we really respect, called the VCS standard, the Voluntary Carbon Standard. And they actually have to have a second standard as well, which is for climate, community, and biodiversity, the CCB standard, to a gold level. So that shows us that they have really done everything that's best practice in these type of projects.
And so, and if you go on the Stamford Trees website, there's this, an incredible array of projects from all over the world. Do you feel like there's a limit to the amount of projects you want to be supporting? Is there a cap on that so that it doesn't get too confusing to people when they visit the website, trying to decide? Because all of them seem to me, I'm like, oh, I love this one. I particularly obviously engage with the ones near impact projects, but how do you limit that so that it doesn't become, so intimidating sometimes with the amount of projects available?
I think actually it's the other way around. As the interest grows, we add more to the platform. While it's perhaps less understood, like you say, there's less support, although we're doing very well and support is growing, we will limit the amount maybe to 20 projects. But as we really scale the buy-in to this program, we will, open the platform to as many projects as we can. And actually, probably the way that'll work is not to do projects anymore, but to actually partner with whole jurisdictions and governments to help them promote the program of Ecuador, or the program of Kenya, or the program of one province, one state in Brazil. So that's how we'll scale up.
And do you find are those kind of conversations that governments, so Kenya, for example, is really open to that as a conversation to be had? Is that something that's on their agenda to kind of be a representing of the projects going on across the country?
So, as I mentioned, this is an economic framework at the end of the day, and deforestation is an economic issue. And as long as we are helping generate the rewards for the important work they are doing by not cutting down the forest, and that money is helping the local communities and in those countries develop in a different way, invest in better types of agriculture, ecotourism, whatever the strategy may be, and we're helping that process, and it's of value to these governments, they will be engaged and involved. But, it is down to how much money we can bring in for them.
And so, I mean, I've got the Kenya project up here, and taking place in Savo East, Savo West, incredibly beautiful parts of the world, and some of the sort of if you're doing safari in Kenya, then I think a lot of people get drawn to the Maasai, but Savo is absolutely stunning. But when I look at it, here we go, we've got the global goals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's so much to it. And I think this is, I guess what you were saying in that first question about that interrelatedness between conservation and people. And that's no clearer on your website than when you see the amount of the global goals connected. Can you talk through that project around how how it is working and how you're measuring that impact and how you're connecting that with the Sustainable Development Goals?
So just to go into the basics of the project and the area was very degraded. It's dryland forest. These aren't tropical rainforests. You know Kenya, and it is a very important ecosystem, and it's got this spectacular wildlife. And really, the area was very degraded historically from too much ranching. Cattle, of goats, things like that, firewood, unsustainable use of firewood. And actually that was putting pressure back on the communities, right? They were getting less returns over time from their cattle ranching, the ability to collect firewood to grow crops. And there was a partnership between a successful American entrepreneur. Actually, this was our founding project and is a project that's been built by the president and founder of our organization, as it happens, this particular project. And he was a successful tech entrepreneur. He bought a conservancy in the region, and he'd always realized that you said that if we was going to protect the elephants and the other wildlife he was working to conserve, locals needed financial opportunities, and that was driving the hunting as well, the poaching. So he started a garment factory and was trying to start a sort of wildlife brand and train local people and give them jobs, so they weren't so dependent on sort of cattle ranching and such subsistence agriculture and firewood and things like that. And they've invested in certain charcoal production. But then they realized that, they needed to go that step further, and they needed to really regenerate the whole ecosystem and get the buy-in of a much wider range of people. So they started partnering with local communities, and communities in this part of the world are structured differently than in the West. There's communal land, there's communal land management, there's tribal law in some ways. So each and every tribe and village was consulted, and they made a sort of association between, I think it's about 30 or 40 different villages and the land they own to join with this conservancy to create a sustainable development plan, which did all sorts of things, from dealing with the forests in the landscape and the wildlife in the landscape, to education opportunities, to tourism development, and created a much bigger vision. And that is financed as well by this REDD+ carbon finance. And as the forest grew back and as the forest was less and less degraded, that carbon finance brought all this together and is helping generate these new types of jobs. They've had a huge amount of regrowth in the forest. They've had a huge amount of elephants come back into the region. I mean, they're almost, it's unbelievable. They've gone from 1 or 2 elephants to 800 in something like 15 years. So, the landscape is now very green, and people are, starting to see the benefits through water and special plant nurseries and education that's being invested in. So it's a very large project with a lot of different pieces, but it's brought together, and it's because you referenced it, touches many different sustainable development goals. But that's how these type of projects work. They are quite large scale, but they come really down to the measurements are based through carbon, and the finance is delivered through carbon. But underneath that, there's all sorts of activities going on, which help in the end improve the forest in the landscape.
And so when you say the finance is delivered through carbon, is that through offset programs and these types of mechanisms? That's
correct. Offsets, I want to sort of maybe go into the detail a bit of what types of carbon finance there are. Offsets really only refers to businesses internationally which have a legal obligation under their domestic laws or through international agreements, such as in the aviation sector, to reduce their emissions. And where they can't do it themselves, they have the options either to pay a penalty or to buy credits from certain types of approved projects like these ones. That is an offset, and that is a part. It's really broken down into, I would say, about a third, which is offsets from business, legally obliged to do that. Then another third from businesses who actually aren't legally obliged to do it. And it's not really an offset, therefore, because they're not part of the Paris Agreement or they're not part of the country's legislation, but they want to take that action. So it's not legally an offset, but they term it as an offset. And it's the same for the public. None of us are obliged to offset our footprint. So it's not really an offset in the legal terms, but you can call it an offset, or you can just say that people are doing their piece to provide finance to this important framework, which is helping the world reduce its emission, that people are contributing to the climate finance which are having these impacts. And then there's a third piece, which is overseas development aid. Traditional aid programs are very interested in this because it is generating these multiple benefits and these development benefits while also meeting international climate targets that richer countries and poorer countries have signed up to through the Paris Agreement, and which richer countries have promised to provide finance to help those poorer countries deliver.
And so we've just gone through this process with you in terms of, we did a full review at Impact Marathon of the different offset programs that are out there. And one thing that interests me, I came across some fairly negative reviews of offset programs. I also came across wildly different costs involved in how much it costs to offset 1 ton or how many tons we're actually emitting. Can you talk to why there's such a wide range and where people need to start when looking at it? Because as someone who is genuinely interested in it, I found it a fairly intimidating place with lots of opinions, and it felt quite hard to know where to start in terms of how to do that in the most effective way possible. It definitely, was grateful to have your support in that process, but we were looking everywhere and we were finding sort of very different conversations going on in all areas of the industry.
Well, you're not alone, and don't feel bad about that. It is a very, very daunting landscape in some ways because it's just so wide. The carbon is kind of like software. When it came in 20, 30 years ago, it's touched every single industry. And climate change and carbon is the same. We're talking about carbon that can be derived from energy production. And carbon units and carbon offsets are called as well, from industrial gases, from landfill, from improved agriculture, from light bulbs being changed, through boilers being changed, through projects like ours, reducing deforestation. So there's this huge range of different types of carbon. And now we're even starting to see carbon technologies, direct air capture, people being able to pull carbon out of the air through chemical and industrial processes, or even sequester it. Puts carbon capture and storage, where there's over the emission stacks. They're diverting the carbon into underground rock formations, and that's being claimed as emissions reductions too. So there's a huge amount going on. They have different prices. The key issue when you're looking into this, if I was to advise people, is additionality, right? Wind farms, solar farms, they're cost competitive. The technology has come down and improved so much, so they're actually competitive with coal-fired power stations, and as batteries come on right now. So do they deserve to be able to issue a carbon credit? And is there real additionality if you buy that and you support them? Less and less so. But in terms of deforestation and REDD+, where you are getting not only these additional benefits for marginalized communities, conservation and wildlife, important ecosystem services such as watersheds and keeping pollinators healthy, But forests, as I explained originally, actually suffer the reverse problem. They don't have a value. So if you are going to do an offset, even though it's a little bit more expensive, perhaps, you should probably choose a nature-based solution on a REDD+ project because of the multiple impacts and the additionality it has.
And so, and when it comes to average adult, how do they begin to calculate what their carbon footprint is for the year? Is that what you recommend, that we think about this and every year we sit down and we calculate it out and we offset ourselves? Is that an effective way of doing things? How does the average person begin to start thinking about offset?
So offsetting is, I think, one part of what people can do, and everyone's different. Depends on how much time you have, whether you're young and single, whether you're married with kids, everyone's going to have a different bandwidth and reality in terms of how they can engage on climate change. I would say, being knowledgeable, if you've got time to read up, is important. Speaking in your community, voting, that's the first thing as a citizen, because ultimately it's the government and industry that's going to have to change. And so the next thing probably is to do what you can in your own life, right? Understand, like you say, measure your footprint, which is pretty easy to do. We've got a very good calculator which allows people to answer questions on different parts of their lifestyle quick. It's localized to your region of the planet, and you can see where your impacts are. And then you can research, what things you want to do more of. Whether it's your transport in your life, the diet in your life, the amount of the way you run your home with renewable energy or not, or with double glazing, things like that. It's unique to each person. But yes, obviously measuring and understanding your footprint in the different areas is the first part of that process if you really want to do it seriously. And on average, it probably costs someone in Britain or America about $200 or £15 to offset their footprint. $200 or £150 to offset their footprint annually. So you may not be able to afford that. You may want to, as I say, try and really reduce your emissions if you can. People can't always, but it's one of a number of options. And, you don't have to kind of feel that you have to do it all either. Even just contributing what you can, doing 20 or 30 pounds in offsets makes a big difference, and maybe trying to do what you can in other parts of your life. So it's down to the individual. I think taking any action is good.
And going back to what you said just at the start of that answer of the importance of governments in this, and I guess it's quite an interesting time to say, okay, the Paris Agreement got thrown under the bus by Donald Trump, and now we're likely to see that get reversed. What has been the actual everyday impact of that decision, and do you feel that the reversal is really important as a symbolic thing or as a practical thing as well?
The Paris Agreement is very important, but it is only a framework, and ultimately it's down to every country itself to move itself forward. And it does give some type of jointly equivalent rules for how that's reported on climate finance, what rich countries need to provide to poorer countries. That's very important under the Paris Agreement, and to encourage a kind of peer pressure of ambition on reducing your emissions. So, because the US is very important in international rule setting, has a lot of experience on that, it was an important contributor to climate finance, being the largest economy in the world, and also just to get it in that sort of collegiate ambition process. It's definitely good that America has rejoined the agreement, and hopefully that'll help the whole world move forward. But ultimately, it is down to individual countries to act.
And in terms of those actions as well, London has been a hub really of the activists Extinction Rebellion. And what are your thoughts on that kind of activism as a valuable thing? There's certainly areas of the press which aggressively attack anyone doing something like this. How do you feel it takes forward the conversation?
I am a little bit cynical. It's not because I don't appreciate those people and I don't understand where they're coming from. That actually is just a sign, a symptom of enormous frustration and urgency and fear, which they are completely entitled to show. You can completely understand how they show, because there has been not enough action on this incredibly serious issue for all of us over the past 10, 15 years, when we should have been acting a lot quicker. Unfortunately, and as we said within Red Plus specifically, which we work on, all of these issues come down to the economy. And it isn't easy for anyone, poor, rich, in between country, ambitious or not, to change our economies to be low carbon. And ultimately, the majority of people still have to pay their mortgage, they have to have a job, they have to have affordable food and transport. And, it's not as easy as rubbing a lamp and hoping that all of these things are going to be able to still be affordable and the economy is going to work while changing the way that, fossil fuels and carbon support the global economy. However, it is doable. Governments have been far too slow and they do need to be pushed. However, I do think that ultimately what is going to solve the issue are not these sort of signs of desperation expressed by Extinction Rebellion and the like, which are so understandable, but people really getting into the nitty-gritty of industrial regulation, of international climate finance agreements, and the very complex work that can be done, actually, as complex as it is, it's not impossible to make that transition.
And so, and I think that puts us nicely into this area which Stamford Trees has really focused on. And I think, it's kind of come up throughout the conversation, it's hard sometimes if you've got a busy job, a family, for you to engage in this conversation, to understand the complexities of it. Furthermore, there's an awful lot of opinions, different media sources. Furthermore, different politicians even say different things. And if you're at risk of losing your job because of green technology, then it's not an exciting prospect to think about the world transitioning forward. So a lot of what you've done is content and storytelling around that as that public face of the Code Red. How have you gone about beginning to create the kind of content that makes your work tangible and understandable, relatable, and in the case of the Prince EA video, I guess viral as well in that respect?
So that's a really interesting question, and I'll be completely honest. Okay, sometimes, as much as I just said, you have to understand the policy. Sometimes you also do have to just connect emotionally and at a general level. And, that is not something I myself as someone from the private sector and sort of a specialist in environmental regulations is good at. But a musician or an artist comes from a different perspective, and there are different ways to communicate. And we have wanted to use those sort of very broad and powerful areas to communicate with people through music, through art, because sometimes, people don't have an hour to go through this conversation you and I are having, right? And in 3 minutes, they want to get the general point, they want to feel good about it, they want to be inspired, and a really good way to do that, and where we've been very successful, is to partner with incredible artists. We had a great partnership, as you mentioned, with the spoken word artist Prince EA. Did 2 incredible spoken word pieces, short videos, which have had over 200 million views on YouTube and Facebook. And we've just launched a new short video music video through a song, actually, with this incredible band from South America called Bomba Stereo and a very special Colombian singer called Nidia Gongora, which has had 3 million, over 3.5, I'd say we're over 4 million views now in under 4 weeks. And that actually leads on to a short film, a 30-minute documentary of an environmental journey and a musical journey. But that is very powerful, and that can at least bring people into the interest. If they want to learn more, that's fine, but at least that can really engage people and not to make it too negative as well. What we're about is solutions, is about positive, what can be done, and highlighting why it's so good to be involved in something like this.
But when you begin the storytelling process and creating content with people like Prince EA and Bombora Stereo, like, how is it that you convey them? How much do they take as the kind of creative storytellers of your work, or do you get involved a lot in the production and the storytelling? What's the process there of creating what you've done?
So we educate them on the key scientific, social, and business practicalities of how the program works. And, these are proven professionals in their fields. They are extremely well appreciated because they are so good at artistically what they do. And you have to let them listen to what you've said sort of in a technical way, and then they, as part of their magic and part of their skill, turn it into a song, turn it into a piece of poetry, and that's down to them and their talent.
And then you join forces to get it out there and do the publicity and the marketing. Exactly. When I see what you guys have done in those two projects in particular, it blows my mind just how many different moving parts there are up to that point where it has 200 million views.
It is a lot of work that goes into that, and it's sometimes 1 or 2 years work of bringing people to the projects. Also having the communities themselves understand and approve the type of work that's going to happen, the type of artists who they're going to be working with. That's all part of the process. And, there is, many months and even as long as a year that can go into making a 3-minute video. It's incredible, but it is important. And these things last, once they're there, they can be enjoyed for years and years to come. I mean, our Prince EA video first one came out in 2015, I believe. And here we are 5 years later. We've recently had a specialist video on demand network, take that on as part of their content. So it's definitely worth doing. And as you build it up, it becomes a sort of little permanent display that the people, and these things are quite timeless, songs, pieces of art, they stay fresh.
I think every time I listen to the Prince EA, I hear something different. I love that about rap and spoken word. There's always like a different rhyme that I didn't notice first time, or something powerful about it that hits me in a different way, because music kind of has this way of transitioning with you and meaning different things at different points in your life. I wanted to just pick on something we probably could have picked up on it earlier, which is around the community you just said there. And I guess earlier on I didn't really look at the perspectives of when you first start working with the community, how do you, and I know that this is the projects you support rather than Stamford Trees directly, how long does that process take in terms of engaging with the community? How much do the community lead the conversation? That always seems to be one of the biggest challenges in development, is the engagement of sometimes fairly complex ideas into the community and how much ownership they then get.
Well, it's a very good question, and we did touch on it slightly, but a very high level. Especially when you're dealing with deforestation in these huge areas where you're having to put these strategies in place, it's essential that you deal with the communities. And it's never just one community. These projects are so big, as I said, the minimum size that I've ever seen is 10,000 hectares, and they go up to the whole nation scale. And probably our average project is 75,000 hectares in size. And you're dealing with multiple communities, and they have to be part of the process. And there's a number of ways. So to answer your first question, I would say it takes 1 to 2 years before the project is even launched to go through that engagement process. And that is part of the rules. You have to. Part of REDD+ involves what's known as free, prior, and informed consent. So all the people living in the landscape have to have been consulted. They have to have been engaged in the process, explained why it's going to benefit them, what it means for them, what their benefits are going to be. And sometimes you can't, say exactly what their benefits are going to be, but because you don't know how much money, you don't know how many offsets you're going to sell, you don't know how many government, overseas development aid contracts you're going to secure, how many business partnerships, whatever it may be. So, or what the price of a ton of carbon is going to be in the market at any one point. But you have a general idea, and you set up a framework, and they get part of that process. So that say, if and when money comes in, these are the community councillors and the elected representatives who are going to decide how that money is going to be spent, or there's going to be an annual review. And there's a process which is made clear to everyone. And that works in the reverse too, that if they're unhappy with anything, all of these projects have to put in what's known as a grievance and redress mechanism, so that if people feel they're not being heard or that things aren't working, there's a clear public process for that information to be put forward and to be adjudicated on. It's never a perfect process, like all our democracies, right? But you've got to just do the best you can, and it takes time, but it is integral to every project. It takes time, and is key.
As we close out 2020, which is definitely a year that will be memorable. I'm always remiss to say things like it's been a terrible year. It hasn't. It's been the year that it's been. There'll be a long tail impacts of what's gone on. How has this year affected the projects themselves? How's it affected your work? I know that at the beginning of this, when we saw planes standing still, there was an excitement that potentially this could be a leap forward for us in terms of the climate change conversation. How do you feel about, I guess, the two sides of that? One is the projects themselves, and the other is the conversation around climate change and how this year has impacted that.
So starting with the communities themselves, it's been very difficult. These are places which don't have the most enormous medical infrastructure, although a lot of the priorities of each project is actually to invest in a certain basic medical infrastructure, which is helping that issue. But, they've had to close themselves off in some cases just to say, look, no outsiders. And that can mean no verifications. That can mean no technical experts. A lot of these projects actually are integrated with really good professional consultants who are helping them to develop new agricultural systems, new ecotourism programs, new sustainable forest monitoring and patrol systems. So I know that some of the projects have just been closed to any outside visitors. So it's hindered them in that way, no doubt. And it's in terms of the demand, people are flying less. Not that we want to encourage that or be, let me say, and the public, who are a lot of our support, they've been challenged. That's, perhaps been a little bit tougher for us, although we've been doing quite well and people have remained generous. And business interest has not fallen away, actually. It was really growing before the pandemic. It's continuing, but so that's positive, and it hasn't really collapsed. And hopefully when the pandemic's over, we'll really start to grow strong again. But to your general point about what the pandemic at a sort of global scale has meant for the challenge on climate change, I'd say two things. Yes, it's created some emissions reductions, but I think that's a false way to look at things, because we need a healthy economy. The fact that people stopped flying, there were less cars, there was less emissions is really not the way to look at it. In that what we have to say is actually we want a strong global economy, and we want people to have jobs and have all sorts of opportunities and all sorts of new goods and products to be affordable. But we just want them to be done green. And the only plus side in all of this has really been, it's quite a technical point, that the British government and a very important follow-up meeting to the Paris process, which will be the Glasgow meeting known as COP26 in UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, technical terms, was due to happen this year, and it was due to incorporate some of the rules that weren't followed up and finalized after the Paris Agreement implementation around markets and how carbon credits are going to play between different countries, projects like these, and those negotiations have failed quite a few times. They're very complex, and people have got different ideas. And the British government perhaps wasn't ready, and has in some ways benefited from having an extra year to get ready for this really important international climate meeting that's going to happen in Glasgow to resolve this very issue. So there isn't really a positive to the pandemic. And, I think it's silly to look at the fact that emissions have fallen, whatever, in the big picture. But it's bought us a little bit of time for this very important set of negotiations that the British government will oversee. And that's the only positive I can really draw from it.
And I mean, looking forward to 2021, what are the main plans for Stamford Trees in that time? What would you like to, and I guess as well with that conference upcoming, what are the things that you would like to see? Are there any key things you're looking for to say that this is a successful summit?
So, from our side at Stamford Trees, we're going to be launching a new platform for businesses to offset to first calculate their emissions and have a range of options as to, according to their budget, how much they want to work with Stamford Trees to balance those emissions. In the meantime, that's very exciting because it's quite difficult for businesses to do that. And if we can make it easy and get them a lot of information and options, that's going to be good for everyone. So that's very exciting. We're hoping that's going to come out January, latest February. We did launch an affiliate program last year, which was 1.0, and we're launching a 2.0 with a lot of new features where people can sort of download a type of app, put it in their website, and help us sell credits, but co-brand it, do it in their colors, their fonts, or ours as they want, select the projects, things like that. That's also very exciting. We hope to do some more of these videos. Now we've got this really clearly proven format of working with artists to visit the project. So hopefully we'll do another one of those. And just to get our names out there and offer ourselves as a solution for people looking to take action. And I've spoken so much there, Nick. I forgot there was a second half of that question.
Yeah, the second bit was about looking forward to the summit that you mentioned in Glasgow. What are the key things that you want to see in there that would show that it's success, and are things you're looking forward to seeing and hoping to see?
So what's up so it is trying to cement ambition always. These meetings are looking for new commitments from various countries to say we're going to, by 2030, reduce our emissions by 50% instead of 40%. So those type of things, they're already starting to happen. We've seen the British government, even the Chinese government, all sorts of governments start to, but there are some laggards, and I don't want to be nasty to Australia or Russia or some countries which aren't maybe doing what we'd like to see, but it's a process, and it's economics, and we respect that, and hopefully they'll get there when they're ready. But some of those more commitments and advances in commitments is always good. But to these sort of market negotiations, I dare not unpack that with you. It's so technically complex. But basically, we're looking to have an agreement that people can trade in and pay. So effectively, someone like Japan, while also giving money, concessional overseas development aid, or may be able to say to Brazil, look, we want to reduce our emissions by 50% by 2030, but we just can't do it. No matter how hard we go at it, practically, we're only going to get to 40%. For that extra 10% that we're committed to, we will give you $500 million, and you stop deforestation or you invest in additional renewable energy, and we will claim those credits and you will get that benefit, those payments. So that is the type of thing. It also will help businesses and voluntary markets clarify how these credits are going to work between national accounts. If we can get all of those rules finalized, it would be huge.
And are you confident?
Well, the negotiations have failed 3 or 4 times on trying already. But I think Britain is one of the world leaders in financial markets and market-based regulation. So I think, having the British government as president of this set of negotiations is a very positive thing, and that will hopefully help that process. And we've had this extra year, so people realize how serious it is, and businesses are very clear that they need this in place, and a number of governments want it resolved. So probably yes, it will be resolved, but it's going to be tough. But hopefully yes, it'll get there.
And so this is the final question that we've asked all of our guests, and it follows on a little bit from that one, I guess as well. But what is it that makes you optimistic and hopeful? We've got a time where more than ever, people are inundated with negative news because it's so accessible to have all sorts of scary news or whatever. It's also really accessible to have empowering and exciting news as well. But what we want to just always think about is, we're lucky, and I'm lucky to have so many positive and energized and optimistic people in my life. And I guess this is my own personal question to everybody, as from a friendship perspective, is what makes you optimistic when you wake up in the morning?
I'm naturally an optimistic person, so that helps. But it is tough, even for natural optimists, to stay optimistic. But I work in this field day in, day out in quite detailed terms. So for me, what's giving me optimism is seeing some of the things that are starting to happen. There really are, finally, and it is late in the day, but things are really starting to happen. Both governments really starting to engage on this, but in technology terms, I mean, the electric car market, batteries, just the technologies around solar and wind, in the way software and satellites can help with deforestation, and all sorts of things are happening. And and in the nuclear world, safer types of nuclear and more effective. So my what keeps me optimistic and I don't know if it's a general question is it a general question or about climate change, or both?
I would love both, because if you're an optimistic person, then your daily morning optimism routine is welcome here.
Well, on climate change, just to finish on that, desperate as things are, I do think the hockey stick of progress hopefully will happen. As things accelerate, they'll just accelerate more and more. And you kind of get to a positive tipping point where action just becomes more and more self-fulfilling. And then on a general note, I find that being grateful helps me stay positive. So if you really focus on, and working in my field, sorry to tie it back to that, but working with, people who really suffer, people who don't have medical support, they don't even have, often legal support. There aren't police, they're dealing with threats to their life, especially living here in America or in Britain. It's easy not to appreciate the roads and the government and all of these things, which often, people want to fight against. But I think if you take a step back and you realize how good your life is in a developed country, that, that certainly makes me feel better.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on today. Thank you for the work you do with Stamford Trees and elsewhere. And obviously, thank you for your support of our project and your friendship. It's been a really super interesting, actually. It's the first time since we met that we've had the chance to sort of go a bit deeper with you and understand things. And I definitely learned some new things today. I've been taking notes throughout that I want to look up. So thank you so much for that, Michael.
Well, likewise, Nick. Thank you for having me on today. Very, very interesting discussion and a great opportunity to continue our partnership with you. I'm very proud to be your partner. And we are inspired by what you do at Impact Marathon as well.
We will. We need to get some of your team down running at some point, but who knows when that will be.
We'd love that. But it's been 20 years since I did my last marathon, and I think I've doubled in weight. But it'd be great to get back there. Definitely would love that.
Absolutely, and we could always do with your support around the course as well. If you're an optimist, then we'll put you at the bottom of a brutal hill to get everyone excited and hopeful again. Thanks so much, Michael.